I wasn't regular morgue staff. I'm afloat, mostly nights, moved wherever a gap opens. That week the flu ripped through the hospital and the schedule looked like someone had shuffled a deck of names and tossed them at the wall. When I clocked in just before midnight, the supervisor handed me a clipboard and said, almost apologetically, "We're covered upstairs. I need you to help maintenance with chain of custody logs in the morgue." It's a sentence you don't expect to hear right before midnight. I told myself it would be quiet work, tags, barcodes, signatures. Procedure has a sound to it, printer sputter, sticker peel, pen scratch, and I figured that's all I'd hear. To reach the morgue you take a service elevator nobody else wants. The call button is a little sunken from years of thumbs. Inside smells like steel cleaner and old rubber, and the floor has a scuffed outline where gurney wheels always stop. When the doors slide open downstairs the air changes immediately. It's engineered cold, a purposeful chill that makes your teeth feel clean and your hands feel clumsy. The light is the wrong kind of bright, the overhead kind that never warms anything it touches. Doors are painted the same obedient color as the walls. Everything is labeled and laminated, drawers, bays, corridors. It's not a place for imagination. It's a place where you do exactly what the checklist says, in the order it says, and you sign your name in a neat line at the bottom. A maintenance tech named Diaz met me outside the cooler, gloves on, sleeves rolled, hair caught under a paper cap. "We had a little hiccup earlier," he said, tapping a digital thermostat with the back of his knuckle. "Temperature stabilized. We just need extra hands catching up on logs." He slid a laminated map toward me, rows and bays with coordinates like a parking garage, and pointed at a desk with a big red buzzer in case a release came through overnight. "Usually dead down here," he said, then winced at his own choice of words. I told him it was fine. It's hard to avoid that kind of language, hospitals are full of it. So I sat and started doing morgue paperwork, which is as unromantic as it sounds. Drawer numbers match tags, tags match barcodes, times align with signatures, one column after another. I printed new labels, the warm barcodes came off the machine slightly curled, and I flattened them with a gloved thumb before sticking them to the forms. The main cooler read 2 degrees Celsius, rock solid. I noted the number on the sheet every 15 minutes as policy demands. Diaz moved back and forth across the hall, the squeak of his shoe soles hitting the same place in the floor each time like a metronome set very slow. The room is quiet, but not silent. There's the steady mechanical breath of the evaporator fans in the cooler. A distant door you don't see, opening and closing somewhere on a different level. The elevator that brings no one at this hour, dinging anyway because that's what it was made to do. When you stand in that kind of quiet long enough, your body starts to make noises for you, joints, breath, fabric, the little rasp of your skin in a nitrile glove, and you realize how loud a human being is. It makes you careful. It makes you gentle. At 12:47 Diaz called from the corridor, "I'm going to check the chiller across the hall. Ping me if anyone shows." His steps faded. The clock on the wall clicked over to 12:48. The temperature held steady. I was alone with the hum. I've heard every building make every kind of noise, heat pipes knocking like someone with a spoon, ductwork popping when the thermostat decides to change its mind, compressors groaning awake. You learn to translate the language of a building. 3 minutes after Diaz left, something knocked on the cooler door. Not a rattle. A knock. 3 of them, spaced evenly like the back of a knuckle, 1, 2, 3. Then a pause long enough for me to count to 4. Then 2 more, 1, 2. I didn't stand up right away. I wrote the time down, 12:51, and listened for a follow-up. Buildings knock more than once. They become proud of the sound they can make. Nothing. I stood and walked to the door. It's thick stainless with a heavy hinge, the kind that shuts itself with a slow, dignified pull when you let go. There's a warming strip in the frame so the gasket won't frost and stick, and a big, idiot-proof latch that won't lock from the inside because someone thought very hard about the worst thing that could happen in a room like this. I put my palm on the metal. It trembled the way a distant train trembles through the track, there, then not there. I told myself it was the equalization valve, or thermal contraction, and went back to my chair. At 12:53 it happened again. 3 knocks, pause, 2. The pacing was almost conversational, like, knock knock knock, hold on, knock knock. I wrote down the time again, not because I was scared, but because I wanted to catch the pattern. I pressed the buzzer with the back of my knuckle to call Diaz. His voice came over the intercom clippy and bored. "Yeah." I said, "You hear that?" He said he didn't hear anything and that he was 2 rooms over with the other unit open. I told him never mind. I didn't want him to tease me about making friends with a refrigerator. I watched the thermostat. It dipped 1 degree, fast. 2 to 1 in under 10 seconds, then back up a half degree like the number was catching its balance. That isn't how air behaves in a sealed space unless something moved a lot of cold air at once. I opened the log to the maintenance checklist and checked defrost cycle times. The unit hadn't gone into defrost. I stood again and looked at the door gasket for frost buildup or gaps. The bead of condensation at the edge had grown a little, and I followed 1 thread of water with my finger just to have something to do. On the wall beside the door there's a little green light to show the heater strip is doing its job. It glowed steady and dim. I pressed my ear to the metal. The hum of the fans was sure and even. The knocks, when they came, didn't sound like they belonged to the fans, they sounded like they belonged to the door. 3. Pause. 2. I counted the seconds, the pause was 4. The first 3 knocks were a little softer than the last 2, like the person had shifted position or decided to be clearer. I want to say I was brave, but really what I wanted was an answer I could sign my name under. So I did the only thing that felt like progress. I opened the door and stepped inside. The cooler light is a different tone than the room outside, it makes everything it touches look like an exhibit. Trays were in, covered, tagged, aligned. The air was a wet kind of cold that crawled up my sleeves. The inside handle is big and obvious and painted that particular shade of glow-in-the-dark that only exists on emergency hardware and kindergarten stars. I closed the door until the latch kissed the frame, not all the way, just enough to hear the gasket sigh. The knock stopped. I waited a full minute, shivering, listening to the fans. When I opened the door and stepped back into the room, the knock started again within 30 seconds. 3. Pause. 2. I went in again, closed the door to that same almost latch point, and waited. Nothing. I did it a 3rd time, this time fully closing it and holding the inside handle in my palm so nobody could call this a draft. Inside, silence except for the fans and the little tinsel noise of condensation dripping onto the floor pan. Outside, knocks. "Okay," I said out loud, to no one. "Okay." I set my phone on the desk with the voice recorder running and leaned it against a coffee cup aimed at the door like that would make a difference. I wrote the times down every time the knocks came. They weren't perfectly regular, but they were regular enough, every 3 to 7 minutes, same pattern, same volume, same feeling that someone was telling me something in a language I didn't know. I listened for pipes, for the compressor kicking on, for some other system handing off to a second system. I heard only the hum and the disciplined breath of the fans. Diaz came back through the door at 1:19 and I said, "Listen." When it happened he rolled his eyes first, which is the correct reaction for a person who lives with machines all day, and then he stopped rolling his eyes. "Ha," he said. He knocked the hinge with his knuckle, the way you thump a melon to decide if it's worth your money. The hinge made a dull, responsible sound, nothing like the knocks we heard. He looked under the frame with a flashlight, checked the pressure relief port, opened the door and closed it hard, then soft, then in the middle, the way you try to reproduce a sound you want to dismiss. No knock. He checked the defrost schedule on the panel and shook his head. "Not that," he said. Sometimes you get thermal crush on the gasket if someone yanks it, but that's a one-off pop, not that. We stood there longer than two practical people should stand, both of us facing a door like it was a person who had just said our names. It did the pattern again. He looked at the digital thermometer and said, "That's weird," like a man who knows the difference between random and pattern down to the decimal point. He pulled a pen from his pocket, uncapped it with his teeth, and wrote something on his palm. I pretended I didn't see him write the times. He stepped inside and signaled with his hand for me to close it. I did, until the latch took. He knocked from the inside, bang bang bang. It didn't sound the same as the knocks we'd been hearing. His knocks sounded human and direct, transmitted like a message. The other knocks felt like they rose through the metal from somewhere it kept secret. I opened the door. He stepped out and rubbed his arms. "Colder than it should feel," he said, and then shrugged because feelings don't go on the maintenance report. We both returned to whatever it is we say our jobs are. He went back to the chiller. I returned to my desk. The building went on breathing. But once you hear a pattern you can't unhear it. The air handler in the ceiling has a tick I've never noticed, a little flutter that hangs on the edge of the sound for a second like a frayed belt. The elevator ding turns into an apology. Labels print slower. The pen I'm holding weighs more. I watched my recorder count seconds and I waited for the knocks and tried very hard to be bored. They came at 2:06, 2:12, 2:19, and then, like someone adjusting a metronome, 2:23. Between each set the thermometer dipped, 1 full degree down, half a degree back. I found myself placing my hand flat on the stainless to feel it the way you feel a car hood hours after it parks. The surface held cold like a promise. The steel gave no story back except that it was made for this and had done this for years and would continue to do it whether I stood there or not. Sometimes the mind goes looking for a culprit it can forgive. I thought about a person I didn't know with access I couldn't map out, standing in the corridor out of camera's reach with something like a rubber mallet, waiting for my boredom to win so he could have his laugh. I thought about the equalization valve and negative pressure and the way metal contracts and expands like slow speech. I thought about how grief doesn't care about engineering and how this room is built to neutralize both. And then I thought about the simplest test, which is what I should have done first. If the knocks stop when the door is fully open, then they belong to the door. If they keep coming, they belong to something else. I opened the door wide and wedged the latch so it couldn't creep shut. The fans grew louder because I'd broken their little weather system. The smell of cold stainless and disinfectant drifted out in a thin river. I stood at the desk, arms folded, the recorder counting up, and stared at the doorway like an animal waiting for a trap to spring. The knocks came anyway. Not muffled. Not relocated. 3, pause, 2. Behind me the thermometer blinked, dropped, climbed. I looked at the map of bays and rows and had the sudden, childish sensation that if I turned my head too fast something would be closer than it should be. I turned my head anyway. Nothing had moved. I don't know why I did it. I took a dry erase marker from the board and drew a little dot the size of a freckle on the stainless where I thought the sound was strongest. Then I stepped back and waited for the next set. When the first knock came, I pressed my index finger on that dot. The sound traveled through my bone before it hit my ear. 3. Pause. 2. I held my breath for the whole pattern and felt my pulse climb into the hollow at the base of my thumb. When the pause ended I exhaled and the last 2 knocks came like punctuation. At 3 a.m. the building changes. I don't know why. Maybe the cleaning crew clocks out. Maybe a system shifts to a new cycle. Maybe the brain hits that trough where coffee stops helping and every doubt you've parked in daylight rolls out and revs its engine. I buzzed Diaz again and said, "Humor me." He arrived with that look on his face that says he has seen everything a machine can do and a few things it shouldn't. I told him I wanted to stand inside with the door fully closed while the recorder ran, just to force one variable and clear it off the board. He didn't like it. He reminded me, with 2 fingers on the handle like a teacher pointing at a rule on the wall, that it always opens from the inside. I told him to keep talking to me through the crack. He said, "If you stop answering, I'm ripping it open," and I believed him. Inside, the air felt thicker, as if it had a shape. My breath made a little cloud at first, then even that looked embarrassed to exist. The glow of the handle painted a sickly outline on my palm. I laid my ear against the inner surface. Fans, steady. A drip somewhere, patient and without urgency. And then, through the door like a knuckle on the other side of a story, 3 knocks, field stripped of echo by the mass of the steel. I said aloud to Diaz, "That's it." He said he heard nothing. I counted to 4. 2 more came, closer together. Again, I said. Nothing. I waited long enough for my brain to put new labels on old fears. I opened the door and stepped out. "Anything?" he asked. I said, "You ever hear a building keep time?" He said, "Sure. But not like that." We stood useless in the light and let the room be the room. The recorder would have whatever it had. I was out of ideas, and I think he was too, so we did the adult thing and pretended to work. He wiped a gasket with a cloth like a priest blessing a rail. I updated the log with the neatest handwriting I've ever used. I kept listening. When you can't solve a thing, you tend to curate it, note it, wrap it, store it somewhere safe. Around 3:20, the door knocked once, just once, so loud it felt like a hand had hit the inside with the heel. I flinched the way you flinch when a tray slips. Diaz swore softly. Then nothing for a long minute that felt like a test of manners. When the pattern came back it was soft again, 3, pause, 2, unhurried and unashamed. There's a specific fatigue that comes around 4 in the morning where caution and curiosity trade places. That's when I asked it a question. Not to the room, exactly. Not to any one thing. I said, conversational, the way you ask a vending machine if it plans to keep your dollar, if this is pressure, do it once. The door did nothing. I said, if this is the equalizer doing its job, do it twice. Nothing. If this is a person, I said, and heard my own voice change shape on the word, do it 3 times. The fans ran. The light kept being the wrong kind of bright. I felt stupid, and then the door knocked 3 times, so light I would have missed it if I'd been writing or breathing too loud. I stood there not breathing at all, and the pause came like a hand raised to say wait, and then 2 more knocks closed the sentence. I don't have a moral for you. People want the morgue to give them a moral because they want to believe there's a clean line between what we keep and what we let go. I can tell you what happened and what didn't. It didn't feel like a prank. We checked the corridor, the hinges, the pressure valves, the cycles, the logs. It didn't fit a defrost schedule or a compressor laboring. It did correlate with those little temperature dips. It did stop when I stood inside with the latch resting and start again when I stepped out. It did sound most alive at a spot on the stainless where a fingertip could feel it before an ear could hear it. It did wake a part of me that organizes fear into lists and tries to make it pass inspection. When I left at 7 the surface of the door was beaded with a more ordinary kind of condensation, and the room looked like what rooms look like when the day people are about to take them back, smaller, less haunted, busy with the memory of bad coffee and the promise of a different kind of noise. I handed my notes to Diaz. He handed me a copy of the maintenance report he'd typed at the desk with his 2-finger method. It said, unexplained mechanical percussion correlated with transient temp drop, which is a generous way to say we heard knocking we couldn't explain. He had written the times down in a column even though he hadn't planned to. I'll run a full check after shift, he said, and then, after a second, that was strange. Upstairs, the normal hospital smells hit me like I'd cheated on them with another set of rules. Coffee. Hand gel. Laundry. The day crew moving in like a tide with its carts and its plans. I thought I'd forget the pattern as soon as I hit the air, but on the way to the parking lot the elevator, the soft stop of a cart, the thunk of a linen bin lid, everything tried to imitate it. The knocks found a little gap between sounds and lived there. I don't know why that night chose me. I don't know what it wanted. Maybe it wanted nothing, and we're the ones who want too much. Maybe there was a perfect explanation we missed because we are only as smart as the problems we've seen before. Or maybe a room built to do one job did something else for a while and asked us to listen. I still have the recording. If you crank it up you can hear the pattern under the room tone, especially when the elevator dings somewhere far away. You can hear my pen on paper, you can hear Diaz laugh once and then stop. If you listen very late at night you can convince yourself there's a breath in it that isn't mine. I don't play it much anymore. There's something rude about forcing a mystery to perform. But on nights when the hallways go too quiet and the fans breathe in long, even pulls, I think of stainless steel and a glow-in-the-dark handle and a door that knew how to keep time. I came in that night expecting procedure and paperwork and the kind of silence you can write your name across. I left with a rhythm I couldn't file. That's the whole of it. If you can explain it, I want to hear your explanation. If you can't, then you already know the feeling of standing in a bright, cold room built to hold answers, listening to a door teach you a different sort of math. Keep the lights on.